Welcome back to the Real Estate 401k Show. I'm your host, Mike Weinstein, alongside Justin Frederick and Ryan Gerdes. And we have back in studio Jay Josephs from Josephs Appraisal Group. If you missed Monday's episode, we talked about appraisals for buyers, what you need to understand about the appraisal process, and what do you do when you get that appraisal report in your inbox. But today, Jay, we want to dive into sellers. And the first question was the last question that I ended with on Monday. So this is an easier one. At what point does a seller, in what situation does a seller go ahead prior to maybe even putting the house on the market, hiring your company to come out and do an appraisal?
So there are certain circumstances where appraising's not that hard, right? When you're neighborhood where there's tons of comps.
Palm Valley, 2,100 square foot.
Great example.
Yeah, exactly.
Great example. So there are those, and where you, as a seller working with your realtor, have a high degree of confidence. You don't need us. But it's those other circumstances where the agent isn't an expert in the neighborhood, or the agent's like, I got comps all over the place, I'm not really sure what to do. I think an appraisal, smart for a couple reasons. One, most of the time, majority of the time, our measurements are larger than the county. So that's great. Like usually there's a return on your investment right there. If my square footage is, I don't know. But like 80% of the time, my measurements are larger than what the county says.
I feel like, so are you guys measuring from the inside? Or
no, we measure from the outside.
So I think that for the most part, when builders are submitting permits, they give you measurements based off the inside. Is that
interesting? I don't know.
I think that might be one of the culprits.
That could be.
I can't even use a tape measure, dude.
We know.
It's a mess, man. I'm a mess with that.
Mike's just a warm body during this conversation.
It has moving parts.
I can hold it against the wall as Ryan walks backwards with the tape measure. I'm good at that.
Measure. So I think we have add value in complex properties. And I think for the realtor, if you're going in, and I just had one the other day where these people priced their home way too high. I'm sure the realtor said it's worth 1.1 and they decided to still price it at 1.8. And I think a lot of agents are like, yeah, okay, we'll do it what you want. I'll get you to come down over time. Well, the seller hired me to do an appraisal because it hadn't sold in 4 months and still had the other person sign out in front, but they were interviewing new agents while I was there. So she was going to lose the listing anyway. And so I think sometimes for the agent, if your seller's unrealistic, I think we have a place in that part of the deal too.
All right, we are in studio with Jay Josephs from Josephs Appraisal Group. If you're a seller, and especially if you have a unique property, maybe it's a horse property, and it's a very complicated property to comp, it's always a great idea to invest the money and have Jay and his company come out there and do a full appraisal so that you are more prepared to put the house on the market. All you got to do is text the word J to 623-AZ-RECON. To follow up with that question, though, because then I want to defer it over to Justin, because I think about Apollo. Okay, so we got a client. He's got a house in Palm Valley, and we just got done saying, yeah, piece of cake, right? This one, no way.
It wasn't. It was hard.
No, well, this one is got to be the biggest, one of 3 of these ginormous houses in Palm Valley, Phase 5. He's got a huge RV garage. The lot. It's like you couldn't just go on the MLS and really simply comp it.
Yeah.
But let's say he goes out and he hires you.
Yeah.
You go out there and say, now it's worth 1.2. I put the house on the market and say, here's a copy of the appraisal. We're justifying it now. Justin, you represent the buyer. Do you guys take any credence in that appraisal that it was already done?
Well, so we don't. But what I do is if I know the appraisal is there, I say, give me a copy of that appraisal along with that contract, and I turn it into an appraiser just so they have a resource of where we got this information from, because we're just helping out to. We want to make sure that the deal works, right? Especially if we already have an opinion of value and there's comps to support it and why they came up with these numbers. So let's turn this in, and it can only help us.
So you can get that submitted to the next appraiser.
Yeah.
Good for you. I don't think that's with every lender. That's great.
Well,
that you guys
I
do
mean,
that.
they can, but do they choose or even know that it existed? A lot of times we won't know that there was something until after we've already received your appraisal report, because they just choose to keep us out of the loop on that.
Yeah, and just on, like, we alluded to this. There's 26,000 listings in Arizona Regional MLS right now. If you don't price your home at market levels, you're bound to lose an opportunity. And if the market says it's worth 800,000 and you list it at 950, 50 days later you get realistic, you have a history. 50 days on the market, your listing is going to get less traction, get fewer eyeballs on it. So missing that opportunity in that early stage of the listing period is a bad decision, right? Like, so having an objective, neutral person saying, here's what I think it's worth, will get you to pricing it fair. And that's a smart way to get your money out quicker.
Can I go a little bit further down that rabbit hole?
Yeah.
So Apollo puts his $1.2 million listing on the market, and because it is so unique, you cannot get a lot size. You can't get an RV garage in that neighborhood.
An RV garage.
He got an exception through the HOA, and they're the only exception in there. Wow. So it's literally one of a kind, right? So he puts it up for 1.2, and in 3 days he has 10 offers on the table, one for 1.35. I'm not saying we're doing a hypothetical here.
Yeah.
You get this information slapped on your desk and say, well, we had this old appraisal worth 1.2, was done 3 weeks ago, contracts for 1.35, and we can justify it because it was on the market for 3 days. Here's the 10 offers that we have on the table. How does that play into value from your purview?
Super important.
Okay.
And the first appraiser didn't have that, but I would have that. And to me, there's appraisers out there who say we don't care about that. To me, how could you not care about it?
Right.
It is showing you the market reaction to the subject property at the most important time period ever now. That matters. And it doesn't mean that for sure I'm going to appraise it at 1.35, because sometimes, like an auction, the winning bid is paid too much, right? It means something. And so you, as the realtor, I would suggest that you bring a copy of the other offers, maybe put a paragraph together to give to the appraiser that says, here's our listing activity, here's how this all went. And it would, in fact, in my conclusion, whatever I concluded, it would be at the very top of the range. I would say, besides all these comps that are in my appraisal, I considered the listing history, because that showed a very favorable market reaction to the subject property.
Would you say I should pull the appraisal since it says 1.2 on it and just give you all the other offers?
Yeah, I wouldn't give the appraisal.
Yeah.
I would not give the appraisal.
All right, we are in studio with Jay Josephs from Joseph's Appraisal Group. If you are a seller and you're in a situation where you would like and probably need to get a independent appraisal done on your property, go ahead and text the word J to 623-AZ-RECON. That's J to 623-AZ-RECON. All right, we're hoping that you can back us up a little bit, because sometimes, our clients, they feel like they know more than us, right? Or as I always say, their Aunt Ethel, who's 87, lives in Sun City, is telling them how things are.
Yeah.
As a seller, what are some red flags that I need to pay attention to as far as getting my house ready for the visit by the appraiser? Like, what are some things that I can do as a seller because as a seller, I'm wanting the appraisal to justify the contract price.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you can tell us some horror stories where you walk into some homes and you're like, oh boy. But what can we do as sellers to prepare?
Yeah. So I would treat your meeting with the appraiser like you're meeting a potential buyer. I mean, and so let's talk about the things that you probably do for that. You get the sellers out of the house. I would recommend doing that. I can have an unencumbered conversation with you, the realtor, better if the seller's not there, right? I could be honest with you. I can be, truthful. We can really talk about what's going on in this market. And then I would just turn on lights, open doors, tell them to clean the house before they leave. I'd love to say it doesn't matter, because we're not supposed to care at all about personal property.
Psychological.
But the reality is it matters. You want to show the house in its best light.
I mean, I shouldn't care that my prom date was ugly, but I do, and I did. I mean,
That's funny.
Sorry.
That's
good.
That was a good one. It's clean too.
So what about like water stains and like some, just stuff that
Yeah.
I walk the house. I'm like, man, this is going to impact the appraiser's judgment on the house.
Yeah, so for sure, curing deferred maintenance items and kind of knowing that if your house is built in 1960, that if there's chipping paint, you better, scrape and repaint it. Like one of the lamest appraisal conditions, where what means the appraiser has to go back out and make sure it's done, is those little plastic electrical faceplates. If somebody took them off because they broke or took them off because they were painting and they don't put those back on, appraisers will call that an adverse health and safety issue, which means they're going to charge you $150 to come back out and make sure
Including
it's-
in the garage.
Yeah, adverse health and safety. I had one yesterday that was at it. They had removed the security bars off on all the bedroom windows except one, and it's a fire hazard if there's security bars that don't have a quick release. So I'm going to have to go back out there. The one that I was at right before I came here today was a final inspection because they turned off the water, and we need to make sure that the water goes on and the plumbing works. So, and yeah, if there's ceiling water stains, you want to do something about it. Because if I don't get on the roof, but if I see ceiling stains, I might call for a roof inspection. If those stains aren't there, I won't.
And that
call
can
for
blow
it.
up a deal real fast.
Oh yeah, because you know what your roofer inspection wants. He wants to say that the roof needs
Yeah.
replacement.
So
you're right.
Common conception is a conventional appraisal versus an FHA, VA appraisal. That you're going to have a little bit more flexibility, or maybe a little bit more liberal value and condition opinion on a conventional versus FHA and VA.
Yeah.
Bust some myths, talk about it,
Great question.
give us some insight.
So I will say this. So I'm currently the only VA appraiser under 98 years old on the panel.
It's not lying.
You don't look bad for 96.
Thank you. It's 95. Darn it. My values would be the same. My value conclusions, and I mean this, VA, FHA, conventional would be the same. My repair list would be greatest on an FHA. FHA is emphatic. They want you to test things. They want you to go in the attic, and I don't even know what I'm looking for in the attic, but your repair list will be bigger. So if you're selling a house that is old and not very well maintained, I think FHA is probably a bad idea. VA, I think, has the negative connotation that people think that VAs are going to come in lower, and that certainly happens. But the great thing about VA is if I'm potentially going to come in low on that appraisal, I need to contact you. It's called Tidewater, and give you the opportunity to provide comps if you didn't take advantage of that opportunity the first time. But it's a great question. I think that VA a long time ago realized that sellers were refusing their offers because they were VA, and they thought that was the worst thing in the world. So they created Tidewater. So my conclusions are going to be the same. Repair lists might change a little bit. FHA is the worst at it.
Gotcha.
Well,
Yep.
big thing that we see on our end, especially with short sales or bank-owned properties, is appliances. So, conventional loans, we can go without appliances. FHA, VA, anything that's built in, it has to be there, right?
Yeah, if somebody took out the dishwasher,
Yeah.
FHA, because there's still a spot where a dishwasher goes, they want a dishwasher.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Great question.
Can I move over to the comp side real quick for you? From a seller's point of view, when they're sitting down looking at comps, let's say we're in a cookie cutter neighborhood, and we have two model matches, right? Both of them are relatively the same condition, etc. One sells for $500, the other one sells for $400. Which comp are you throwing out?
So I'm the guy that uses them all.
Okay.
So the appraisal has to have at least 3. That's really the minimum that you'll ever see. For me, instead of trying to narrow it down and only use 3 or 4, I'd rather give you 8, and I'll use the low and the high. And then when I'm making my final reconciliation, I might throw those out and say they set the range, they set the high and the low, and there's relevance in that for me. But ultimately, I'd rather give you all the information. And what I shouldn't ever do is eliminate sales from the comparison approach just because of what they sold for.
Okay, let's add a little flair in there. The one that went for
He's tough.
500 was posted on the MLS. They did a great job with pictures. They did massive market push, open house, whatever. And then the one that went for 400 was a FSBO.
Yeah. So there's an argument to be made that I could exclude that FSBO because I don't have any information on it. And so what I would do is I'd either include it and give it less consideration, or I would exclude it and say, hey, I didn't use this sale. The underwriter might see it. I didn't include it because it was for sale by owner, and it's $75,000 below everything else that's sold. It doesn't appear to be a market-driven transaction. So I can do that.
Okay, good.
I've always been told to give you guys the information on this is a FSBO. If there's comps that we don't want to use, tell you what they are and why.
It's
we don't
better.
want to use it.
Yeah, that's what one of the things we taught in the class is be proactive. Instead of saying, I see this house next door sold for $50,000. Yes, it closed. Yes, it closed yesterday. I'm not going to give it to the appraiser because I don't want him to use it. I'd rather you give it to the appraiser and then tell him why it's a bad comp.
All right, so actually it'd be for the seller's perspective and the buyer's perspective. Appraisal comes in low. What's happening behind the scenes when everybody thinks that the appraiser's wrong, but I can't first of all, I can't pick up the phone and call you anyways, but if I could, I can't say, hey, you're an idiot. I got to make nicey nice. And because you're talking about egos, people don't like to admit that they're wrong, but appraisers make mistakes.
Absolutely.
And so what does that process look like?
It's not a fair process. And it's not at all. And the trend is to not allow you to have that process at all. Like Rocket Mortgage isn't a sponsor of this podcast, right?
No,
Okay.
we can talk shit about it.
So I have multiple stories where Rocket Mortgage wouldn't allow an appeal, which is terrible because you guys are right. Like appraisers make mistakes. Sometimes they don't know the neighborhood. They didn't understand the nuances and they got it all wrong. And Rocket Mortgage is like, yeah, sorry, we don't accept appeals on that. And they're moving towards that. We're moving towards that where the only one who's going to decide if an appeal would be sent to the appraiser is the underwriter. So it's really important to be on the front end of that, meeting the appraiser, bringing comps and all that stuff. But there's still a process, and the fair process is it'll go to the underwriter will look at it, send it to the appraiser, and expect a thorough response to all the issues. And if they made a mistake, they should change their value.
All right, you know who else is not a sponsor of the show is Zillow. So I want to talk about Zestimate, okay? Because this is something that we commonly get into. My job is to walk into your house when you're wanting to put your house on the market and give you my best opinion on price. And oftentimes, and not all the time, oftentimes my price is going to be lower than the Zestimate.
Do you pull that? When you go to listing, do you always pull that so you know what their expectation is?
I don't pull it to present it. I pull it so that I know what I might be up against when I walk in there.
Great.
But I'm not going to print out the Zestimate in whatever the case is. So walk us through a little bit of the Zestimate, and really, you talked about finding like-kind properties and what happens when you cross a major road and things like that, because sellers don't understand that. They're just like, oh, across Bethany Home, this whole sold for this, and
it's terrible.
Yeah.
So this is how you know Zillow's bad at their job. They came into our market and became an iBuyer. They became an investor buyer like Open Door and OfferPad in a market that was going up like this.
And they got their ass kicked.
They lasted 6 months and they were gone.
Yeah.
Right? Because they're following their own numbers and their numbers are wrong. Like, it's a smart business model for them. Because if you can develop a website that people go to it and it makes them happy, it's also, I think sometimes it's called porn. But, so I think that's part of their figures is that we want you to come to our site to,
I believe they used to have a disclaimer. I'm pretty sure I'm right, and if I'm wrong, then I'm wrong. But I think they used to have a disclaimer that said that the Zestimate was for entertainment purposes only. Because because it's true. You're not going to get an accurate picture. But anyways, what were you going to say, Justin? You had something.
I was talking about. You guys were talking about the process. We've recently changed it in. I don't know if it's industry wide. I know they're pushing for it, but now we used to do the reconsideration of values. We would submit it. Yeah, we would submit it. That was step one. Now it's on the buyer. So the buyer they're the only ones that can do it. So when they're receiving their electronic copy of the appraisal report, there's actually a button on there that they can submit for reconsideration of value, and then it gives them steps.
And by the way, is there also a form that says if you feel like there was racial bias, fill out this form? I heard that's coming.
Yeah, I haven't seen that yet.
Yeah,
I haven't seen that yet.
Well, you will, because you work on one of my mortgages.
It's coming next week. So step 2 would be if it was rejected by the buyer, then we would send it up through our credit risk department, and then they could throw out the appraisal or request a desktop review, which the desktop review could then allow us to throw out.
That makes sense. One of the reasons I think they're focusing on not allowing these so much is the agents are submitting the appeal.
Yeah.
And what if the buyer's like, I just want to pay a fair price? Like, if this is all happening potentially behind their back, I can understand where that would bother the higher ups.
Yeah, but I think what's going to end up happening, because a lot of times this is the buyers just listening to all of the noise, right? And so I think what's going to end up happening is the agents and the lender, we're going to sit down and we're going to go into those links and help them through it, because ultimately, a lot of times the buyers just want that specific home. They know what else is out there, and they want this house.
Okay.
So we'll see how that goes. But this has only been going on for about 3 weeks now.
Oh, so that isn't. I knew
it's very recent.
I knew we're changing this stuff. By the way, Zillow's there's some big stuff going on with Zillow, right? Like, they don't want you to do coming soon listings or something.
It's a
transparency.
It's a tremendous overreaction.
An overreaction to what? I didn't understand why they were doing that.
Because and this one I'm not going to call out by name because they got deep pockets, but there are.
And Zillow doesn't.
And Rocket doesn't.
Right.
I didn't say anything about Rocket Mortgage. No, but there are, and this is horrible. There are large brokerages around the country. In our business, we call them pocket listings.
Yeah.
So I list Justin's home, and I've got 5,000 agents in my brokerage. Because we want to keep all the money, we're going to only market that home within that brokerage.
So that's different than a coming soon.
Well, but coming soon has a little bit to do with it because of how coming soon is reported. And so it really comes down to clear cooperation. And so now what's happening is because this mortgage company doesn't want it to go on the MLS because we want to sell it all in-house. Really, at the end of the day, the seller gets hurt by that. And, yeah, and so coming soon, I think they're rolling it out, I believe, into more markets.
Okay.
But it's you don't now have to, if you do go coming soon, you don't have to syndicate to Zillow. You can syndicate to Zillow, and then there are agents. And I don't know how you feel, Ryan. Agents get so worked up about Zillow. And they're the bad guys. So you know what? I'm going to punish Zillow. I'm not going to syndicate my listing to Zillow. Well, you're only hurting your seller.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think most of those people that are getting caught up on that too much are the people doing 1 or 2 transactions a year, so I don't really give a shit about them. Because they're not really approaching it like a business. They're usually like, it's a side hustle, and they're not really tapped into stuff like that. And so they buy into the hype, and then they get caught up on all that. And so I don't know. The people that are out there doing business and doing it right, they don't care about that.
Got it.
All righty, Jay Josephs, thanks for being with us.
My
if
pleasure.
you are looking to get an independent appraisal on your property, or I would dare say, and I think you offer this service, whether for buyers or sellers, you think there's a bad appraisal that came in and you need to get it done right, they can reach out to you as well for that.
We do review appraisals all the time.
All right, all you got to do is text the word J to 623-AZ-RECON. That's J to 623-AZ-RECON.